Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good wherever you are. This is Third Party Threat Hunters podcast season two. I believe this will be episode two. And I have with me Mr. J Bobo, who I've been friends with now for going on a year, I think, running each other at conferences. Jay is the creator, CEO, founder of Breach Siren, which is a great tool that I'm happen to fall in love with as well now, and wanted to spend some time on a podcast demonstrating a little bit. But Jay and I were first going to talk about just some other random stuff on third party risk. But Jay, why don't you just give a little bit of background about yourself too, so the listeners know?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Greg. So, I've worked in tech and cybersecurity for over 20 years. Really sort of self-taught. I was a kid. My dad brought in a Commodore 64 and said, "I don't know what it does, but figure out how to use it," type of thing, and really started from there. And I fell in love with security really early on, even though I didn't work on it in the early part of my career. I was a big fan of, I think I was 10 years old when the movie Sneakers came out. Robert Redford. I don't know if you remember that one. So I had this,
That's the Wayback Machine. One of
yeah,
by the way, none of the cybersecurity movies I've ever seen ever get it right. It's like watching I'm an ex-military and watch combat. Those are dummy rounds. Those aren't real rounds. Of course, why would they use real rounds in a movie anyways? But
yeah.
it's lost on Greg at that point. Yeah, keep going.
But it was the magic of Hollywood that got me into some of this stuff. And I remember some
Yeah.
of those early sort of movies and things like that. So I started playing with things, and my parents had no idea what I was doing. I remember, utilizing a war dialer. So you have to be maybe a little bit older to remember this, but you go in and it would dial numbers and see if someone would actually ping back to find bulletin board systems. So I think I was the only kid probably in the inner city, born in Toledo, Ohio, who probably had a war dialer running, I'm assuming. And really that I kind of got one from
Maybe
there.
the only war dollar in Toledo, but that's a
Yeah,
different
maybe.
story.
Yeah.
Sorry to our Toledo listeners, right?
Yeah, but, my parents would be like, "Oh, why is the phone line like we can never utilize the phone? You're always, sort of on the internet, but that love for computers and security and Dick Tracy and stuff like that. I always had a interest in sort of learning more in technology and fell in love with software development. I was a software developer for a number of years before heading into healthcare security and running a product security team. So that's kind of really where my expertise is in building really great products and, from a product security perspective. So I think my focus is not sort of a traditional one, like starting from network security. We really focused on, how do we protect the needs of the business? How do we protect patients and consumers? Which led me into Breach Siren. So hopefully I have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about, all the fun stuff that we're working on and breach intelligence. That's a little bit about my background. Great.
That's great. Thanks, Jay. Kind of say it's a little bit similar to mine. I didn't start out as a computer scientist. I just fell into it because it was kind of fun to do, and
Yeah.
nobody else is interested in my story, so we'll just leave it there. But so the three ugly truths we were talking about, kind of what we wanted to talk about on the podcast, and you had listed the three ugly truths, and I'm just looking over at my notes here: financial impact, accountability, and the third one, which actually I like as the first one, is crappy expensive tools because they abound.
Yeah.
So if I could hit that one first, just because I think it's of great interest to me lately because I've seen quite a few crappy and expensive tools in the space. Right, we had the first generation tools, and we won't name names on the podcast. We don't want to offend anybody or people to walk home thinking Greg hates their tool. It's more about for me. It's about a lot of the tools in this space currently are focused on compliance and not necessarily security, right?
I agree.
I did it, and then that's it, right? It did what? And how well did you do it? And are they continuing to do it? Is really the other question. But Jay, expand on your thoughts on this area.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think one of the other things is sometimes when we just focus on compliance, I do think there is a benefit that practitioners can deliver for the business. But when you really focus on best practices, there's an opportunity to develop more trust with your counterparts in business and with your CISO. So for example, you just do compliance, you say, hey, we got the compliance activity done, but you're viewed as these folks just get the compliance stuff done. They don't offer any more value. So why do we need to make any more investments in them? Why do we need to, make investments in their careers or their budget and so on and so forth? And I think that when you think, when people come to me and say, what do you think are the most concerning issues within, cybersecurity from a risk perspective? I always bring up third-party risk management. I remember I was having a conversation with a CISO of a really large company not too long ago, and it was like, "Oh, this third-party risk stuff has no value. It's just I don't see any." And I was like, "This is one of the biggest concerns that you should have." And I think it really gets down to sometimes the tools and the way in which we sort of communicate value. So what we need is, to your point, is compliance is great. Cool, but I would even argue, Greg, some of these tools aren't even really great from a compliance perspective. I think
I'm not going to argue with you, Jay. Actually, surprise, surprise, right? So I think what you describe it really better than I did. I had thought about it in that perspective, right? Is one of the challenges I think organizations have in valuing the third party risk space is because it's done in a compliance checkbox way, particularly CISOs, right? CISOs are looking at the three pillars of the triad and saying, well, compliance isn't one of those pillars, guys. It's it's the C in that is not stand for compliance in the CIA triad, right?
Yeah.
And yet we and many cyber shops in particular treat third party risk as a tick the box.
Yep.
And it's where I get back to the third party threat hunting. It wasn't a name picked at random. I felt we we have a first party threat hunting teams in most operations spaces, right? That is going on and they're called a threat intel. They go out and look for stuff that's a risk to their first party. Why aren't we doing the same in the third party space? We're not threat hunting for third party risk. We're just ticking a box, and that is really hard to get. I can get this. Don't tell anybody, but AI is going to make that go away. I mean, literally, it's one of those easiest things that you could push a button and say, AI, do this. Now, is it going to do it perfectly? No. That's why you need a human still to go back and look at stuff. But you don't need 5 humans.
Yeah.
You need 1 human to do that work, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. So there's a couple of things that I've noticed when I sit down with practitioners and I ask them about some of these tools that they're utilizing. I say, okay, here's a question for you. If you sit down and you have a conversation with your cybersecurity team, what's their overall opinion of DAS scans? I was just on Chris Romeo's AppSec podcast, and I think you mentioned DAS, and we all sort of turned our nose up. And, oh my goodness, it's crap to a certain extent. So when you look at some of the tools, like I said, we won't mention any by name, but for a lot of the risk rating tools, they're doing external scans, and they can't answer really fundamental questions. Things like, does the vendor have comprehensive MFA? Do they actually do vulnerability remediation? Did they remediate any of the things from the last pen test? Engagement. How do they do in phishing? As an example, is the CEO and CFO constantly still clicking on every link that pops up in their email? As an example,
those are only going to come from physical validation, by the way. Those that kind of ability to have assurance that they are doing pen testing and that they're following up on it. Yeah. There are ways, and my first book talks about it. Not to say that you can't use these tools, these big box tools, as I call them, right? That what I would discourage folks from doing is focusing in on the scores that they get in those things, because those are algorithms that you have no window into, to the most part, and may include stuff that you just don't care about. They do almost all of these through actual alerts and vulnerabilities, like open ports, patch management. They can make inferences from the sinkholes that actually are decent. Do they get everything? No, but they still can produce decent data if you know where to look, right? I say don't use it don't use them as they described for you to do, is essentially. And I think maybe that frustrates some of the tool makers, but look, they do have some use. I just don't. maybe instead of using the one side of the hammer, use the other side and pull the nail out. Is what you're doing is pulling the nail out. You're not hammering the nail in, right?
Yeah.
For lack of a better way to do it, or use the far side of it. To keep using the analogy. Let's hit on accountability real quick because you mentioned accountability. We need help from regulators and ISACs. What are the problems? I actually don't. I mean, it's something I haven't thought about this, but I'd really like to hear your thoughts on the accountability issues.
Yeah. So, as an example, well, actually, so as an example dealing with that, I think, what's really interesting is that regulators themselves, when I first started talking about this particular sort of, some of the issues that I was seeing, what I noticed is that in my talks with regulators, said we should neither. So I first started speaking about sort of some of the issues with the tools themselves. A good example is, solutions not letting you monitor all of your vendors, lack of transparency. I remember sitting down with the cyber risk team at Marsh at a recent cyber insurance conference, and they said, we don't utilize the risk rating tool. I mean, like, what we do, but the signal isn't good enough, to be absolutely honest. Those scores mean nothing to us. And these are the people who are really concerned about, claims and payouts, and they said the manual assessments, to your point, really look at from, an underwriting and a claims perspective, they provide way more value. And so in talking to regulators about, hey, you guys could help us a whole lot more with third party, like, we want to do this thing, right? We need help. We need help with the accountability portion, and it comes to centralizing a lot of this data. We want to know sort of who's had a breach, let's just right there. Who's had a breach within the last 30 days? And I had a conversation with Valerie Cofield at CISA, and she said, we're kind of waiting on Cercia. We know that with our threat intel tools, they're out there, they don't answer these particular types of questions. So when you look at sort of what's happening on the federal level and also the state level, in my conversation with the Federal Reserve, same thing. They came up to me and said, hey, we have a problem just attempting to do supervision because we don't get this information from the state entities. We may have a bank that goes through a bank supplier that reports a breach to, the Attorney General's Office of New Jersey. They're supposed to report this to us, and they don't. So if we have a problem on the oversight side and the supervision side, and what does that mean for us who are attempting to go through and do third-party risk management? Just on the cyber, like, I'm not getting the ESG, I'm not getting into the other stuff. Let's just say on the cyber side. And so what I'm saying is, from an accountability standpoint, is that what we need is, with Cercia, with some of these other things, is we need more centralization. We need the various states to say, hey, we have sort of a common framework, a common model for disclosing breaches or disclosing cybersecurity incidents, even not even breaches. Let's just start with cyber incidents and provide
or even events,
right? So that we can hold each other accountable, because they have neither the budget or the scale or the expertise to, do the things that me and you do every day. So that's what I found with the regulators. And I think it's also true with the ISACs. I'd like to see sort of the ISACs doing, really leading in this particular space of saying, you know what, we're not really going to get this information from the federal entity. We're not going to get this from threat intel. How do we pull this stuff together in one place so that we can do a better job of holding each other accountable? That's kind of where it really starts.
And then the last, it was your first in the topic list, but it was the last because I think in some ways it will hit home, is financial impact right in this space. Is many third-party risk management teams struggle with communicating value. What's the best way? We hit a bit on that earlier, that as a compliance engine, we don't make great impact. And both I think impact in terms of, wow, what's the value of the team when it just does compliance, right? It's a check the box widget. By the way, I think humans naturally work well in that space, unfortunately, which is why I think it becomes a compliance engine is it's task driven. And so I got my tasks done for the day and go home. Whereas cybersecurity, and again, it's not a poke at anybody in particular, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but it's a thinking person's game, right? So you're not done just because you ticked a box. You've got to go pull the thread until you get all the whole thread out. And then you figure out where's the next thread in the sweater to keep pulling on, right?
Yeah.
It never ends, and that's a little annoying for some folks that it's never ending. I think it's job security, and also it produces. I think if you're a curious mind, it's a great way to continue to learn, right? But I think financial impact. I'll say my 2 cents. Sorry for the the dad joke in there. I'll say my 2 cents in there is one of the reasons I think cybersecurity is the most important, not the only one, but the most important risk domain in third party risk is because it's one of the few that bleeds over into the others.
Yeah.
In particular, financial risk, right?
Yeah.
That whenever you have a cyber event, incident, or breach, it almost never stays in its lane. It always goes over the guardrail into the other risk domains, right? There's wreckage from the crash in all the other domains,
Yeah.
privacy, financial, certainly in compliance, because now your security fell apart. You probably weren't compliant as well. I hate, again, we can use that. Your insurance is, I mean, it just plays everywhere, right? It doesn't stay in its lane. What are your thoughts on this area, Jay?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we go back and think about sort of what are the needs of the business. And the business is going to care about something that we all care about, right? It's the impact to my wallet. And I feel within cybersecurity, within the risk, is we don't lead with how much does it cost if we get it wrong. And I think that, if you're a third-party risk practitioner or cybersecurity practitioner, you should have off the top of your head, you should know how much it's cost your competitors, how much it's cost your peers. You should be able to have anecdotes that you can utilize to roll out your strategy, to your point earlier. If you're in healthcare, you should know that it costs Anthem almost $500 million for their breach. Was it back in 2015, 2016?
There are numbers out there, by the way. If you tell me it's high risk, I'm gonna throw up all over you, right? Because high risk compared to what? Compared to
Exactly.
me stubbing my toe on the bathtub again today, or high risk compared to? Look, I know that folks don't really like it sometimes, but IBM Ponyman study gives you by geographic region, by industry, what the cost per record is. Is it perfect? No, it's done off real data, which is better than most. And
Yeah.
secondly, the breakdown by industry and by geographic region. If you're a healthcare industry in North America and you have 250,000 PHI records, you can do a back of the napkin calculation about what the potential damage is. By the way, you should be sitting down when you do it because the numbers get really exponentially fast,
Yeah.
really quickly, right? They get scary, and suddenly you go, "My cyber liability is going to cover, insurance isn't going to cover this." Welcome to the club. Here's your card, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's cyber liability insurance is going to cover a decent sized breach, anyways. It's more of just it's a warm blanket to make you feel better.
Yeah.
But
That's a really
and to get and to get your customers off your back. But we can do another podcast on cyber liability insurance another time, Jay.
yeah.
Let's spend a few minutes while we have just show us what you can on the product and on Breach Siren. I think I really enjoyed watching your demo of it earlier.
Yeah. So, really quickly, and I'll pull some stuff up here. One of the things the reason I started Breach Siren is I was evaluating, risk ratings and monitoring tools, and I was unhappy with really one question that I kept asking that no one could answer. And that one was, have any of my vendors reported a breach to a regulator within the last 30 days? And everyone said yes, for the most part, Greg. I said, okay, great. Give me a list of your sources. And they were unwilling to provide a list of sources. And when they did
Shocker.
Yeah, and when they did, it was a really short list. And I said,
well, I went off camera, so when you show that people don't see it, hopefully it gives more real estate for your demo.
Yeah, let me see if I can find my my mouse here. So what we did, and one of the things, and like I said, I know I don't have a whole bunch of time. Let me go. What we did is we said, let's start reaching out to people and seeing what's out there. And let's also identify if this level of transparency holds value for practitioners. And what we found out is for those going a little bit past compliance, that was, yes, indeed, that's exactly what they were needing. in attempting to get budget for their program and attempting to speak with more authority. I'll give you an example. So one of the things that we'll go through here and we'll show, and this is where practitioners' jaws usually drop, is I say, here's a list of the sources that we provide. And we let you know when these sources drop, as an example, hey, we can't get a particular source for a particular reason. Maybe the state's no longer providing it to us, and so on and so forth. And the reason that we go out there and do that is so that when you do have an issue, you get to walk into the room and say, hey, one of our vendors disclosed a breach to the New York Attorney General. You're able to have that conversation with legal or finance. According to our contract language, they were supposed to notify us, but they didn't. Is that a concern? And what they found out is that there's a ton of value in being able to state information in that particular way. There's more transparency, there's more integrity. It allows you to set up more trust, as well. Hey, you're bringing me information from sources that I care about.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we started at. And one of the other things that we do, which is really cool, is, as a practitioner, that the naming issue and matching sources up is a pain. And we found out for a number of different clients have a ton of vendors, more than sort of your usual, hey, I got 500, I got 1,000. We're talking about sort of in the policyholder space. Okay, great. I have 50,000 companies that I care about. Well, I have in my system PepsiCo. You have Pepsi Cola. How do we go through and set up these lists? And on a lot of the systems, especially where you have to go through and create them yourself, you're talking, are you going to upload all of those things? So what we do is that we made it more affordable. And we say, hey, if you provide us a CSV, or we have an API, we have RSS feed, we also provide engineering support. We say, hey, connect us to Salesforce or connect us to your GRC platform. We can do that for you so you don't have to think about it. And you sit back and receive, email or text message alerts, other sort of alerts that we can do of when something happens with your vendor. And I'll give you an example. The last point on what we've built is within the first 30 days, a healthcare client partner said, we had an issue. It was tied to, I believe it was MoveIt. And they said, we sat down with our threat intelligence team to see if they had any information on this organization. What we had found out was that this organization had actually reported a breach to a regulator. The threat intel entity had no information whatsoever on this, but you guys did. And so that was in the first 30 days. And so what we're finding out is that with this information, you can go back and ask that vendor, hey, we're going to want you to increase your cyber liability coverage, or we're going to ask you to put in some more controls. Why is this awesome? This is awesome, Greg, because now it allows a practitioner to go through and to communicate their value in a different way. It's not just about how many assessments did you get done this year. Now you're saying we got X amount of.
It's about risk identification. It's risk identification, right?
Exactly. You can say, hey, did you know that we were able to bump up, cyber insurance coverage for a number of our risky vendors, by this amount? Now you have something that ties back to dollars and cents in a really big way,
Well, I can tell you as a practitioner in the space and a leader in the space, event notification, event incident breach notification is a problem in the space, right? First of all, as I said, a third party incident, event, or breach is inevitable, right? If you have more than a dozen vendors, given cyber activity, the chance of an event is now 100%, 99.9%, right? So that's inevitable. If it's greater than 50%, it's inevitable to some extent, but the numbers are in the 90% range. So the problem becomes, as your product identifies, a lot of vendors just don't tell every customer, whether that's because they want to hide their head in the sand, or they just don't know all their customers. Whatever the reason is, there's a number of reasons why. And this is another data point that is really critical, again, because where the rubber hits the road in our space is when there's an event of incident or breach, we have to take action. We're required to take action.
Yeah.
And I would rather know than not know. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's.
I'm
please,
sorry.
Yeah.
There's two other points.
No, you're great.
Two other points why you need to know. So one of the things is that we see more disclosure regulations each and every day, right? In finance, Federal Reserve, OCC, FDIC required within, I believe it's 36 hours. And then you also see the National Credit Union Administration. The other thing to also think about, too, is that if you do not disclose timely, let's say you have cyber insurance, Harvard just lost out on a $15 million payout from Zurich because they did not notify. It was a different sort of situation. But, you have to disclose also to your cyber insurance company. And if you don't, then you're going to lose out there, as an example. And then the other thing is looking at Meridian Link from last year. If you don't disclose, your attacker may disclose, and now you end up with a bigger issue.
No, yeah. Now you look dumb and stupid.
Yeah,
right.
Meridian, right, that they went through, and the attackers reached out to the SEC and said, "Hey, we breached
by the way
Meridian Link," and they didn't.
And they didn't tell you.
So
thanks a lot, guys. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different reasons why having this information is important, and I know why a lot of the bigger entities don't have it. One, they're focused on compliance, but it's also a very hard problem. This data is messy, it's all over the place. Every state is different. Every federal body is different. Some of them will try to, make it difficult for you to get at this information for various reasons. And so we really need to do, I think, a good job as third-party risk practitioners informing everybody of sort of the value of this particular domain. And if you look at the dollars, if you look at the class action lawsuits, right? If you look at, the financial impact of companies, third-party risk management is important. And to your point, cyber is extremely important because of the way it impacts, the balance sheet. So
I agree. Well, we've gone over my 15, 20-minute normal time limit because it's an easy conversation to have with you, Jay. So hopefully the listener stayed the whole time to the bitter end, as they say. But it's been a great conversation. We could do an hour, but again, I think nobody would listen to the last half hour. Probably be like, oh my gosh, these guys are still talking. So we'll have to do another 30 minutes at some point where we chat about some other topics. I think the one we had conversation we had before, the one would be a good one to start with, which I've now forgotten, but was an interesting conversation. We both commented we should have just pushed record at the beginning.
Yeah.
So we'll figure that one out.
Well,
all right.
Thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure. Looking forward to doing it again real soon.
Sounds great.